Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday. My name is Emily Cantrell, your director here at World Trade Center Seattle. Programs that World Trade Center Seattle hosts each year. And yes, even during a time of physical distancing and a global pandemic, this is actually a time where we truly feel the need to engage more than ever, even if it's done virtually. We want to make sure we keep this dialogue going. If you're not a member and want to learn more about our programming, feel free to send a chat message and we'll make sure to connect. This is our first time holding a session in AirMeet, which you are in now. Hopefully you enjoyed the networking opportunity right before you came in here, but apologies in advance for any technical difficulties as we are all learning this together. If you did not have a chance to network, we will keep the social lounge open for about 15 minutes after this program until 9:45 a.m. We truly appreciate the Port of Seattle's partnership on this program, on the Can We Talk series, where we have worked to create really thought-provoking, compelling programming. We like to have intimate conversations in an effort to bring better unity and understanding, not just to the workplace, but to our daily lives. So at this time, we'd like to turn the virtual stage over to Lucretia Claytor of the Port of Seattle. Lucretia?
Thank you, Emily. Good morning and greetings, everyone. Happy Black History Month. Like Emily said, I am Lucretia Claytor, a financial analyst in the Maritime Division at the Port of Seattle. The Port is committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion and has a comprehensive strategic plan to guide our work for the next quarter century. This work began in 2012 and is committed to continue until 2037, where the goal is to become the motto of equity, diversity, and inclusion. This work will be achieved by eliminating disparities in access to working with and for the Port of Seattle, ensuring that all internal and external programs, structures, and practices have equity, diversity, and inclusion at their very core, increasing leadership accountability for reaching tangible equity, diversity, and inclusion goals in our work across the Port and in Port-related industries. The Port of Seattle began its sponsorship of the Can We Talk series in 2019, and I, like many of you, have attended a few of the talks. One such talk centered around the term intersectionality, coined by a Black woman. Yet I noticed that at that talk, there was a void of one crucial voice, a Black woman. I was so bothered by that absence that I gave feedback to the organizers of the talk. And do you know what they did? They invited me to the table. I accepted the invitation and I came with snacks to share. Those snacks were, as we began planning this year's offerings and due to COVID-19, the first opportunity was pushed back to the month of February. And yet there was no talk or plans for discussions that had anything to do with the month in which Black American history is highlighted. I shared with my colleagues and we activated. And this, my friends, is why Black voices matter. Thank you for this opportunity and I hope you enjoyed today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Lucretia. We really appreciate you joining us today and for all of your help planning this program as well.
Thank you.
So now it's time to get the conversation underway. If you haven't used AirMeet before, which again, this is our first time using it for a program, it is very great with audience engagement. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there is the reactions feature. Feel free to use that. There is chat. You can put questions in the chat throughout this program. We'll try and save those till the end unless there's one that's really timely, then we will ask it in real time. If you see a question that you want to promote to the top of the list, you can do so. We plan to save questions for about the last 15 minutes or so, but of course that can always change depending on how this conversation is going. So to carry us through today's conversation about why Black voices matter, we have three incredible Black leaders with us. We have Jordan Babineaux, former Seattle Seahawks player, author, speaker, entrepreneur. Jordan, I realize there's one thing that you don't have on your bio, which is Seafarers King Neptune. We'll have to talk about that. We also have Jamila Conley, Vice President of Business Transformation Office at F5 Networks. Jamila, thank you for joining us. And we have Girmay Zahilay, King County Councilmember. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we'll get started with a quick lightning round. And in honor of Black History Month, in a few words or one sentence, what does Black History Month mean to you? Jamila, please start us off.
Yeah, no, thank you, Emily, and thank you for that great introduction. Yeah, so what does Black History Month mean to me? You know, it's a time of reflection. As we all know, the Black person journey here in the United States is a complicated one. And there is, surprisingly, as we all know, the events that happened last year, there's a big lack of awareness. So this year, more than any year, you know, Black History Month really represents a time to not only reflect, educate, but also gain awareness to figure out how can we continue to impact positive change for our society to level us all up. So Black History Month is incredibly important to continue to set the stage for change for the rest of the year, every year.
Thank you, Jamila. Jordan, how about you?
Thanks, Emily. Thanks everyone for being here. When I think about Black history conceptually, on surface, it feels rewarding, right? There's a month that honors the tributes of African American people in our country. But more than that, Black history is American history, and I'll leave this thought with the whole audience to kind of ponder on. How can we examine the history of our country without acknowledging the global footprint of Black people? Oftentimes when we look at and talk about the education and the curriculum of Black history, it's separated from American history. But Black history to me is American history.
Thank you. And Girmay, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Thank you, Emily. To me, Black History Month means celebrating Black people past and present. It means acknowledging how history affects us today. And it also means committing ourselves to pro-Black and anti-racist policies.
Excellent. All right, well, Girmay, let's stick with you as we begin to learn a little bit more about you all and how you got to where you are today. You grew up in South Seattle and graduated from Franklin High School. You went on to graduate from Stanford and UPenn Law School. You worked in the Obama White House and you pursued anti-poverty work before taking office a year ago. This is all so impressive. Can you tell us more about what this took? What drove you and how did you make this happen?
I think when I went from Franklin High School to Stanford, a situation where I was in a public low-income high school to one where I was surrounded by people of wealth and means, that's really when I first started to feel imposter syndrome. So a lot of the drive had to do with just being an insecure kid who wanted to feel like I belonged, wanted to prove that I belonged, a desire to distinguish myself and show that I'm capable. And then the other side of it was wanting to make sure that other young people of my background who grew up in public housing, went to public schools, our first generation college students had the same opportunities as me. So at every step of the way, whether it was in college or law school or starting a nonprofit that mentors young people of my background, my whole goal has always been to reach back and make sure that other young people have the same opportunities.
Love that. Thank you so much for everything you do for our community.
Thank you.
Jamila, you are up next. You're a vice president at F5 Networks, headquartered right here in Seattle. You lead the business transformation office, which encompasses M&A integrations and strategic business transformation activities. You were the first Black vice president. Amazing. And now you are sponsoring the F5 Appreciates Blackness Inclusion Group. How did you break through these barriers, and especially in such a male-dominated industry?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. You know, it's interesting because it's seeing that sometimes Girmay talked about imposter syndrome, and that is very real. And I would say that, you know, the journey and the continued journey of both getting to leadership and continuing to lead is not an easy one for a woman, and especially for a Black woman. And so the way that, you know, I address those barriers, it really depends on, you know, it has depended on strong mentorship and strong sponsorship, sorry. but also partnership. You know, it's just like the way I look at things is through my life, I am very selective of who are the people I'm relying on to help me navigate the waters. So choosing mentors, you know, who can be there in your corner and help to guide and open. That is at every level, you know, whether it's someone that is a peer, whether it's someone that I reported to, or even someone who's a couple of levels above me. But it's like I have to look at that at every, you know, every angle to make sure that you have that support network, because without it, you both have imposter syndrome. And as you continue to navigate, especially the corporate world, you face a ton of microaggressions, and without that support, it's easy to, you know, let it get the best of you and not be able to break through. So for me, it really came back to those two things: sponsorship and mentorship.
And Jamila, before we move on to Jordan, I mean, you've talked about sponsorship versus mentorship in previous programs. I think it's just such an important point. So for people, how would you explain it just in one sentence? Like, how do you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the way that I look at it, and as I've explained it to people in the past, is that I look at a mentor as someone that I look at I think there's something that I can learn from you. And like I said, a mentor can be a sponsor. And sometimes you can have sponsors that you may have never talked to. But, you know, I'm looking at that mentor of like, I want to learn something from you, or I think that you can help me. So whether I outright say, you know, it's like I very rarely ask someone, I want you to be my mentor, but that's my mental process of like, I want to learn more from this person. Where I think a sponsor is someone not only that will open doors for you, but in the case where a mentor is a sponsor, that mentor gets to know you and they're looking back at you of, I see something in you and I want to help pull you along. And sometimes you don't even think you're there yet. That you may think, I'm still back here, but the sponsor is looking and saying, you know what, you're actually already ready for this next step, whether you know it or not. So I'm going to help open these doors to get you there. And so that sponsor relationship is very important because it can start with being a mentor and, you know, them getting to know your career goals, how you work, and them opening doors for you. So the sponsor relationship is really about who can help open those doors for where you want to go, where that mentor relationship is really who can help you navigate and think about which path do you want to be on. So that's the way I think about the difference of the two.
Perfect. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And next we have Jordan. So Jordan, while we know no one has a perfect life, you did what children dream of. You became an NFL star. You went from nearly a decade in the NFL to becoming a sports broadcaster, entrepreneur, and now author. Walk us through that process. How did you do it?
Thanks, Emily. You know, having that sports background, certainly, you know, I was faced with a lot of challenges. I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, surrounded by drug abuse and addiction and violence. And the streets really seemed like a faster way to make money at the time. But one of the things that I always, you know, since a kid, kind of had this idea of understanding how things worked. I remember looking at a clock on the wall and I was like, wow, you know, how does this work? How does a clock, you know, can say the right time? Well, the older I got, I realized that all it took was batteries, right? It's like you put batteries in it, it works. But there's different mechanisms that move through this clock that makes, you know, one dial alter the next, and understanding how maybe my relationships can determine you know, how my self-esteem or how my view around money can help create, you know, personal wealth and also, you know, community impact within the framework of where I live. So I've always had the development or this idea of developing a growth mindset, and it was always looking forward, far exceeding, far past my circumstances and my environment to create something better for myself. When thinking about transitioning and mostly in NFL, there's huge disparities in terms of African American and minority head coaches and general managers in the NFL, and frankly, I think that's in many cases somewhat consistent in the corporate space as well. But you kind of have this notion of others have or experience a few things. One, I would say it's neglect, right? So when we're trying to create awareness around, how does African American become more leaders, or you see women and minorities in different positions of leadership and influence, aside from entry-level jobs or mid-level managing positions. The community in a whole, and certainly not everyone, but they have this, I would say, this mindset of neglect, right? They tend to give it no attention. They're either unconcerned, right, where they're just completely disinterested in the idea, or frankly, just bystanders. They're just uninvolved. And each of those, positions essentially is ingrained in a fixed mindset where it's like, oh, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Or, kind of having, what you would call this work avoidance mechanism, if you will. If it ain't out of sight, out of mind, right? It doesn't affect them directly. And so as a result, we see a reduction in distress in the organization, but you also see a deflection of these tough issues. And you also see a shift of responsibility away from those who really need to change the most. But it's really when we face and address those tough issues that we'll actually see change. And particularly in the NFL, when you had 3 head coaches that went into last season, African-American head coaches, and you can throw Ron Rivera in there as the 4th as a minority. And Anthony Lynn, the Chargers head coach, was fired last year. Only 2 general managers in a league that's 70% Black, African-American. So there's some huge challenges from a systematic standpoint when we look at and examine, just particularly in the NFL, but around the corporate space in general. Where can we develop African-American and minorities to put them on a path for high-level positions and position of influence?
Thank you so much, Jordan. So let's talk a little bit about recent events. I mean, last year after the murder of George Floyd, we saw perhaps the biggest Black Lives Matter movement in U.S. history. The phrase Black Lives Matter, it was coined in 2013 after George Zimmerman was acquitted of killing 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in Florida. But last year, Black Lives Matter, it proved to be more than a moment. It was truly a movement. It shook the world. It became an international phenomenon. So it's safe to say that everyone attending today, we all understand that Black Lives Matter. But let's talk about Black voices, and which we are seeing an emergence of both in the community, in corporate America, and in society. So Girmay, if we could start with you, why are Black voices so important in the community?
I have a friend who likes to say that talent and brilliance are universal, but resources and opportunities are not. And so when we take that phrase, to me, it means that some voices are left behind. That includes Black people, especially in Seattle and King County. As a policymaker, as a council member, there are so many times when I've partnered up with Black community members and their ideas and their ingenuity is beyond amazing, whether we're talking about how to structure housing to best impact housing unstable people, how to structure our system of public safety in new and innovative ways that uplifts marginalized groups, how to bring in new voices in voting and civic engagement. The ideas that I've been hearing have been amazing throughout my first year and a half in public office. The other side of it is also that if we truly want to solve our region's biggest problems, we need to bring in the people who are most impacted by these problems. And by every key indicator, Black people are being harmed disproportionately in all of our systems, whether it's criminal justice or housing or COVID-19, disproportionate harm. And if we're going to solve these problems for all of us, we need to make sure that we're listening to the voices that are closest to these problems. Nobody can tell you more about a community and the issues it faces than the people who live in that community, who experience it every day. So as a policymaker, for me, partnering up with Black people, truly grassroots, truly close to the community, has been integral to shaping good policy.
Girmay, what you said at the beginning and talking about how resources are not universal, I mean, what I'm hearing, it's talking about equity versus equality. And for the leaders in this room today, I mean, what can we do to focus on an equitable future? I know it's kind of a big question, but why don't you actually, let's take a step back. Why don't you talk about the difference between equity and equality?
For sure. The image that I always think of is that image of people standing on crates looking over a fence to watch a baseball game, and equity is all the boxes that they're standing on being the same, but some people, even if the boxes are the same, still can't see over the fence. But that's equality, everything being the same. Equity says that we need to put the right amount of resources to get people to where they need to be, whether that's the same amount or more. And so then the people who couldn't see over the fence, even if the boxes were the same, you make the box a little bit bigger and they can see over the fence now. So that's the image that's always stuck in my head. But to me, it means putting doing what is needed, even if it means disproportional attention and focus into the hands of people who have been harmed historically and currently, to get them to live a thriving and successful life. That's what equity means to me.
Thank you so much. And for anyone who's not familiar with the image that Girmay was just talking about, you can Google equity and apples. There's one with an apple tree, and you can also Google equity in the baseball game and you'll see it. But it's a great visual to help you understand that. So Jamila, can you talk to us about why Black voices matter in corporate America?
Yeah, and first of all, Girmay, that is my favorite image when I think about equity versus equality, and also a great segue into why Black voices matter in corporate America. That, everyone talks about wanting more diverse talent. And obviously the events of last summer, the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that it's put this awareness now in corporate America of like, how do we change? How do we do more? But the problem is, and to go back to like Lucretia's opening, that if you have a problem that has, spawned and the impacted people are people of color, but the impacted people aren't at the table to help with the solution, how can you get to what the right solution is without Black voices at the table? And inside of corporate America, for years, what I've seen is they talk, there's a intent around diversity, but if everyone looks the same at the executive table and at the decision-making table, and you don't have that voice, how do you know what the right process is to bring in diverse talent? And how do you know if your practices inside of your company are part of the problem? So that's one reason that, having Black voices makes a difference. The second thing is, even when you bring in that talent, that if you bring in the talent and they aren't supported, they don't see people who look like them, they don't have a community to help mentor and, help them navigate, you're going to find people who get frustrated, who feel like outsiders, and they leave. And then third, from a business perspective, what happens is you can have the best product in the world, and obviously every public company, the end game is revenue. The end game is profit. And you can't reach other communities if you don't have diverse perspectives at the table. to help you open up those ideas. And so it's very important to have Black voices at the table to both bring in that talent, to retain the talent, and to know that you're approaching the right solutions, and to have someone to challenge your processes. That, you know, for years you have companies that pride themselves on, you know, pick a percentage. Like when I started at 5, we were very proud of our referral rate, that 40% of our new hires were, you know, referrals from employees. But if you have a company that's already 70% white, and that referral network, you refer people you know, you refer people who look like you, that you're just exasperating the problem. So, you know, and it's just like, that's one of those that maybe we need to look at the process and think about how can we be more intentional? You know, you need people to help, like I said, when I say challenge the current process, even before I was in a position where I even had much of a voice around this, but I always challenge the process that when I talk to people around diversity, many times the answer would be, oh, you're right, we need to do better college recruiting. But to me, that's not the answer. That's part of the problem of, if the thought is, oh, to get more diverse talent, we always have to start from the bottom. It's like you're not thinking about this holistically of how do we get more people in leadership positions? How do we get more, you know, people of color in middle management positions? And then how do we actually look at college recruiting? Because the thing that I found is that without a true process around college recruiting, if you're still always going, and I could go on forever about this, so I will wrap it up. But, you know, it's just like, because if you look at the school systems, and if Black people, to Girmay's point, that if we're being held back, if we're being segregated and separated at the elementary school level, and depending on what college, you know, the path of Black people end up taking, they may not even hit the colleges most companies are going to, if they're going to the top programs and then looking for the top students inside. And if they don't have a process of, okay, how do I actually hit the affinity groups inside of the colleges to recruit the kids, even the kids that you end up hiring from the college programs, you may only hit 1 or 2 Black people that you're bringing in, along with the, you know, 100 or 200, et cetera, other new college grads that also happen to be white. So you actually have to be intentional inside of those processes. It's not just more college grads, but you need people to actually question those processes so that you think differently of, maybe we need a different way that we actually bring new talent in, young talent in. How do we bring, like I said before, mid talent and leadership talent? And then inside, when they're inside, what is our process for promotion? And how are we actually being equitable around those promotion processes? So having Black voices at the table to help evaluate those processes and remove racist processes inside your company is very key to actually see the needle move at all. Otherwise, we just keep talking about the same thing and saying, I don't know why it's not changing. We have, you know, a Black D&I person and everybody else is white. So that's why, to me, I'm very passionate that Black voices matter a lot if we want to see change in corporate America. I'll shut up now.
Jamila, no, it's such an important conversation, and this can be an entirely different Can We Talk program, just hiring alone. Before we talk with Jordan about Black voices in society, I do want to touch on one more thing. So after George Floyd's murder and the huge Black Lives Movement, there was just, I mean, you can search for like chief equity officers or, you know, DEI positions online. There are thousands in Seattle. And so I'm trying not to ask you a leading question, but what I'm trying to say is Black individuals, people of color, they're good for other positions and not just DEI jobs. So what do you say to companies who are like, oh, I hired this person for a DEI role, check the box, done.
Right, exactly. And the thing is that while that's a start, if that role doesn't have teeth, you basically have hired your token to pretend that you've done something. Because honestly, to me, the most powerful platform is having those voices throughout your company and leadership positions inside of the business, because that's where you see real change. The real change comes in conference rooms when you have people who are able to be allies inside of conference rooms, to be able to have powers of positions, to shift the conversation, to hold people accountable around how you're hiring, how you're thinking, and how you're bringing perspectives to the table. That, you know, a D&I position, like in my mind, as passionate as I am, and our D&I director is probably on this call, so Mary, if you're out there, it's nothing against you, but to me, that position shouldn't have to exist. If you truly have D&I inside of your DNA at the company, and each of your leaders actually understand the impact of inclusion, period, end. Like, to me, but it has to be in your DNA. It cannot be you know, like I said, I can go into this forever, but it's not just I'm fully supportive, and then I go on and turn my back and move on, versus I know what inclusion looks like. That every time I have a new hire requisition, that I put a job description out there, I know that I'm not going to make a decision on a position unless I know I have a diverse slate. I'm not going, you know, it's just like, every time I need to go and hire someone, that I personally, while I know recruiting is going to do their job, I'm also doing my job of what are those networks that I can, you know, post this resume out there to get visibility. Even if I don't get a single candidate out of that, at least I am doing my part to find people to represent a diverse talent pool. Like, it's that simple. It takes like 5 seconds. You know, it's just like, you have to have that in your DNA. And then once they're there, giving those people a voice in every meeting, making sure that everybody's voices is heard at the table. That's how you create strong decision making. That's how you empower people. That's how you get people you make people feel included. They want to work. They want to do their best. So, you know, it's Jordan, I would love to know more about your mindset network, because it's just like, it's really about a mindset. Not how can I do the least, but how can I do more? How can I be challenged by other people's voices, other people's voices? You know, how do I look at a table and think, okay, I have a nice mix around me, so I know that we're going to get some good perspectives and actually have some good challenges and good debates. So it's extremely important to me, and I feel like I've gone on a tangent, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much, Jamila. D&I in your DNA. Love that so much. So Jordan, let's talk about society in general. Why do Black voices matter?
Yeah, and you know, just to piggyback on Jamila, I mean, I had my pen ready the entire time. We got two strong voices on the panel that I may want to make sure that I'm getting all of the good nuggets and writing them down as well. But I mean, a few things that you highlighted, that, you know, we talk about the peoples and leaders and promoting within the company. And oftentimes organizations don't even realize that the Black voices and the Black talent that they need to promote is already within their company. You know, you don't have to go out and look externally. Sometimes the leaders are already there. And it's just about what you said earlier, having that sponsor or that mentor to help you see that or develop talent within, I think is one way to do that. You also mentioned, you know, companies and organizations having, you know, D&I initiatives at the top of their strategy, at the top of their board meetings and conversations. And I look at that as two ways. One is that organizations want change. You know, I'll tell you, I know and have met with many people around this topic specifically, and they want change. And but in creating that change is how do you prepare your organization to have success within this new change, right? I mean, this is really an organizational shift in culture and even in how we accept and bring in inclusion and diversity within our company so that they can be successful. I think now more than ever, companies have a chance to make a significant impact. I mean, we're talking about life-changing opportunities, breaking down generational barriers that have existed for so long. And I mentioned these strategies and these initiatives at the top of DEI, but how do you measure whether your company has achieved its DEI initiatives and goals? How do you measure that? Companies will say, well, we want to be diverse, but not too diverse. We want to be inclusive, but not too inclusive. But we want change, and you kind of go through this battle of looking at the company within as a whole and start challenging these hiring practices and expanding these areas. As you mentioned, Jamila, it's not just about going to the HBCUs to find talent. We have to expand our areas of source where we recruit talent. And it's going outside of these lead generation apps and damn algorithms. Let's get away from that. We're people, for goodness sake. And again, I just go back to grooming the talent that's already within the organization. Sometimes if we just open our eyes and sit at those tables of the shareholders and in those leadership teams, that we'll see that we already have good talent within the organization.
Well said, Jordan. Can see all the reactions flowing in. Glad everyone has found that feature. Jordan, talking about companies with DEI initiatives, and Girmay, Jamila, feel free to jump in here. What do you tell a leader when they say, oh, I don't have the budget to invest in it? So maybe there are initiatives, but we don't have the money to spend.
Yeah, it sounds like an excuse to me, but listen, and I understand. I mean, certainly we're in a pandemic. Things have changed, right? I mean, the balance sheet doesn't look the same for some companies. The income statement has significantly been impacted by a global pandemic. I believe certainly that's a real thing. I'll share this, Emily, because here I have just finished my book titled Pivot to Win, where I'm talking about change, and I'm talking about how do we move from where we are currently into what we want to embody and see something new and something different. I'll share this quote with you by Einstein. He says that we cannot solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. So we now have to start shifting how we're thinking about how do we get change. All right, with that said, so where are we now? I think there's a new reality of understanding what our new budget is, for every organization, right? And I talk about ground zero. Ground zero is an opportunity where we can have some new conversations about how we're serving our customers, our organizational values, things that we're passionate about. And also say this, to have an organization or a company with no community footprint is very shallow, in my opinion. I think it's very shallow, right? Is that, oh, we're all about the dollar. We're all about building revenue, when we should be about building community. And if you're building community, the byproduct of that, you will see at your bottom line. So I'll let Girmay weigh in on an opportunity to talk about that.
And Jordan, anything else before we do move on? I mean, you talked more about Black voices in corporate America, but do you have anything you want to add about Black voices in society in general before we move on?
Well, I mean, adding to what Jamila and Girmay has already suggested, I think it's important. When I look at it from on the sports side as well, is that, it's very similar to what you were saying, Jamila, about we hire a D&I person, now we can check the box. Well, NFL organizations do it every year. There's this Rooney Rule that exists where they have to interview Black coaches for a head coaching vacancy. And I find it very sometimes disturbing that you can see an NFL franchise put their finger on their guy. Oh, I have my guy. Our guy is this. And you're like, I didn't even hear any African-American or minority head coaches interviewed for the damn job. How can you say that this is my guy? And it's, the NFL community has strong opinion about where we are, you know, as in the sports world. And I'll share this too, Emily, around, you know, voices in general in society, and how can, I think the biggest thing, and maybe one thing that people can take away from today is that how can, what can they do now? How can they have an impact? And I think number one thing is these are tough conversations. There's no way to put it. These are tough conversations. I mean, you're talking about generational pain, overcoming adversity for decades and hundreds of years to reach a point where now people in leadership positions have the opportunity to create a change. And it's more so, how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as a bystander, as I mentioned earlier, someone who sits on the sideline and isn't involved in change? Or you want to be remembered, you know, as a trailblazer, someone who's promoting generational opportunities for African American and minorities. And so when we talk about, you know, tackling or a fierce conversation, as Suzanne Scott would put in her book, there's 4 elements that embodies what that means. And one of them is to tackle a tough challenge, as we've talked about, is to provoke learning, right? That's another way to do it. It's to interrogate reality, right? What are our own ideas around this topic and subject in specific? And more importantly, I think, you know, the biggest ingredient to this fierce conversation is, how do we enrich the relationship, right? I mean, we're not here to break people down, right? More than anything, we can have a fierce conversation. We can have a tough conversation, tackle a tough challenge, interrogate reality, but how do we enrich the relationship?
Thank you, Jordan, so much. And as Leah put in chat, Q&A is set to start in a few minutes, and we also have a few questions to ask you before we get to Q&A, so we'll try and fly through this and some of the things we've already talked about. But you know, it's going to take us years for our region to recover from COVID-19, and this is an opportunity now to plan for an equitable and inclusive recovery. Let's not return to what normal was. Let's emerge stronger than we ever were before and ensure that no one is left behind. But we all know that changes don't happen unless people are willing to make a shift in their attitude or behavior. So Jamila, Girmay, Jordan, feel free to just jump in here. What steps do we need to take in order to make that happen?
I'll jump in. So, you know, to me, it goes back to, one, educating, people continuing to educate and get awareness of the problem. It's shocking to me that how many people didn't realize how much institutional and structural racism there is after the events of last summer, you know. And it's great to see that, you know, books were flying off the shelf, you know, around, so you want to talk about race and white fragility, etc. So that was awesome. And, you know, it's like, I'm glad people are educating themselves. And, you know, so I encourage that. But I think in addition to that, it's also taking the action that goes along with it, starting to actually understand unconscious bias, your unconscious bias. What does that mean? How does that show up? You know, taking a hard look at understanding microaggressions and understanding not only how is that impactful, how is, you know, and understanding the pain that Black people undergo when microaggressions occur, but what does it mean to be an ally and actually interrupt those microaggressions? You know, checking what I'll call kind of the code words that, and kind of to Jordan's point, that, you know, there's a lot of practices in place that are supposed to be protections around, you know, discrimination and racism, but they're not always followed, or they become a checkbox and you move on. That actually checking what are those kind of code words. So when you take it all the way back to, and this really speaks to institutional and structural racism, that when you think about schooling, and a lot of people will say, you know, it's just like, and this really goes to checking your bias as well, that how many people, you look around your neighborhood, your community, how many Black people are there? How many people of color are there? And do you live there because it's a quote unquote safe neighborhood, is safe really a code word for a white neighborhood? Because we can't say whites only anymore. When you say, I'm putting my child in the best school, is the best school really code for, I'm putting my child in a white school? So there's no diversity that your child is growing up with. And when you think about the problem repeating itself is the fact that if your child is growing up without diversity in their community, no diversity in their schooling, what do you think is going to happen when they become an adult and they are unconsciously discriminating against hiring people who look like them because they've never seen anybody else? So think about, what are you doing to promote that from the start that continues these practices? Like, if we want change, we have to think about it from everything we do, from the time we bring a child into this world, and then what are we doing as adults? And how do you think about those things? So to me, if we want impact, think about, what are your biases? What are those things that you are assuming that, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not racist, I just happen to live in a very secluded neighborhood and insulated, and all of my thoughts are insulated, but I'm not racist. Like, that in itself, check your bias. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions coming in. Girmay, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me, by the way? Jamila, your audio was a little bit shaky on my end. I don't know if that was my computer.
I messaged you, Jamila.
Yeah, I was going to add a lot to what Jamila was saying. To me, the story of COVID-19 is much broader than the story of a virus. The story of COVID-19 is a story about how generations of unjust and unsustainable policies have left certain groups more vulnerable to the virus. A story about how our systems and our safety nets were just not prepared to take on the economic impacts of the virus to keep people safe. And the story of COVID-19 is also one that shows us more than ever how interconnected our fates are. If one group is vulnerable to the virus, all of us are vulnerable, all of us are at risk. So we need to fix the holes in our collective ship before we all sink. And so to me, what we need to do moving forward is be better advocates for a better overall system that protects all of us, because again, our fates are intertwined, and a virus has shown us that more than anything else can show us. So what I would say for our business community, for everybody listening to this, is be a voice to advocate for a more fair tax code in Washington State. Be a voice for making sure that as our economy grows, and King County and Seattle's economy will continue to grow, make sure it's equitable growth, and make sure that the prosperity is being shared broadly. Make sure the voiceless have a seat at the table, that they are sharing in the wealth, that our housing policies are making sure that the people who work for you, that the custodial staff, the people making your food, the people driving you to work, that they are able to live near where they work, that they're not driving 4 hours a day to come and provide you the service that keeps your company alive. So that's all I would say is, please be an advocate for a better overall system, and make sure that the lens of how effective the system is how are the people who are struggling the most, the people who are most vulnerable, how are they doing in our economy, because that is the barometer, that is our metric for how well we are all doing together.
Thank you. And Girmay, while we have you, we have a question from Delmas Whitaker from the Port of Seattle, who says, Jamila has provided us with plenty of recommendations for operational, oh my gosh, I cannot speak. The question is, how do we operationalize equity and inclusion in public agencies?
So I'll talk about it from the government side, but all of you are incredibly powerful as lobbyists, right? And I don't mean lobbyists in the like sleazy negative way, but I mean it in the you have a voice and you're able to shape public policy just through your advocacy. So I would partner up with local organizations or local community members who are truly connected to the most harmed groups, the people who are struggling the most, and elevate their voices, help them with letter writing campaigns, ask for meetings with elected officials, and be there not to advocate for your own interests if you're somebody who is doing okay. Advocate for the people who are struggling the most. Tag your elected officials on social media, call them on the phone, send them emails, identify certain pieces of legislation whether it's at the federal, state, or local or county level, and push for those policies that would really fundamentally make changes that take care of people. So those are the things that I would recommend. And I'm happy to connect people to any of those resources or to help you identify pieces of legislation that would be helpful or help you know who your elected officials are at every level of government.
Great. Thank you so much, Girmay. Another question that we have from the audience is, why do you think we are seeing a majority of blank faces looking back when these conversations are being held? And these are difficult conversations to have, but Jordan or Jamila, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in, and I'll share this this quote from Barack Obama. It says, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek." And then I say this because it doesn't matter at what level that you are, where you are within your organizational chart, within your company. When you start to create change, you need a group of change agents, and you need people and allies to help promote and move to this better place, or whatever that goal is. And I think each company has or can identify what their own goal is. I'm not here to say what it should be, but I do believe that those ways of how we hire and recruit should be challenged and examined, and can the system that you currently have be better? So wherever you are, I just continue to encourage you to champion a cause, be it in education, in healthcare, in policy making, or in finance. There are barriers in each of those areas and categories that needs to be shaken up and needs to see what better looks like for those goals and desires of inclusion within your own company and your workforce.
Thank you very much, Jordan. So here's a question from the audience once again. Can you talk to those allies who say, "I don't see color"? Jamila?
So I'm just going to start off by saying that, or just clarify, that saying you don't see color is one of the most offensive things that you can say to a person of color. And so one, just take that out of your vocabulary. Someone says it, just tell them, take it out of their vocabulary, and just remind them that would be like saying to anyone, as a woman, that I don't see women. Like a man saying I don't see women, it's like, what does that even mean? But at the crux of it, the other thing that's just very offensive about it is also that I know that the thought is like, oh, I just look at everyone as equal, but that's actually more harmful. That is part of, to go back to the prior question that Jordan answered of like, why all the blank faces? Because the blank faces is, if you're looking at everyone as the same or equal, and back to the example around equity, that means that you're absolutely okay with the fact that we have less than, I think, 3% of Black people as CEOs. And, and it's just like, well, I don't see color, so there's no problem here. That you go into a company or you look at, like McKinsey puts out this report of women in the workplace, and they talk about the leaky pipe. And they also break it down by women of color and how the leaky pipe, you know, it's just like you get mid-career and Black people just start dropping off in the workplace. And, you know, it's like, and that's where that frustration leads in, that people are, you know, suffering microaggressions daily, and you're calling yourself an ally, but you're not doing anything to interrupt that bias because you don't see color. That you're not helping anything, you're a part of the problem. So take that out of your, just take that out of your vocabulary, learn more around bias, learn more around microaggressions, and figure out how you can actually be a help and a voice to people that need a voice. And if you can do that, then that helps raise us all up and bring more Black voices to the table. But saying you don't see color just means that you've closed your eyes and you're turning a blind eye to the problem. So that's my thought.
Thank you very much, Jamila. We have 4 minutes left, and Councilmember, I know you have a meeting to get to at 9:30. So before you go, a couple of quick questions, and then a reminder that networking will continue until 9:45 for anyone who would like to stay behind. So again, quick questions. First one from the audience. Does anyone have any organizations that come to mind who you consider leaders in DE&I today that the audience can model and learn from? And maybe just the name of an organization, and we can Google to learn more about their DEI efforts.
Yeah, Emily, I'll jump in just because I had a recent conversation with one of the vice presidents over at Seattle Kraken, the new hockey team. And Todd Lawinke, the president of the organization, he is a tremendous leader in terms of making sure that he invests in his people. I remember, I'll tell a quick story. When he was at the Tampa Bay Lightning, he was the, I believe, the CEO or the general manager of the hockey team there. And I was down in Tampa doing work around the Buccaneers. And he brought me, and I went in and made a visit, took a visit, and he gave me on a tour. And when I say he know his people, I mean from the people who clean the change the trash to the people who serve the food. He's very, very, very people driven in the set of creating and developing strong relationships within his company. I would say the Seattle Kraken would be one of the organizations to look at, and specifically Todd Lawinke as a leader. But there are several other organizations that have created a network of people who have great influence around DEI practices. Tada Partners, they may be on the call. Danny and Tara may be on the call as well. Those two are taking the forefront in creating diverse organizations and at least starting the conversations to get people more aware of creating change and helping them reach the goal that they choose or the goal that they're trying to get at with trying to exercise DEI practices within their organization.
Thank you, Jordan. And Danny and Tara, they were a part of our last Can We Talk program in December. So if anyone's interested in learning about that, you can visit World Trade Center Seattle's YouTube page, and you can actually watch that program. And it's about 8 steps that companies can take to infuse DE&I into their organizations. So one last question, Girmay, we'll start with you in case you have to hop off for your meeting. But to the leaders on this call who, after hearing this conversation, feel compelled to make a difference, what is one step that they can take right this second?
Let's connect. Let's connect. I'm happy to follow up with anybody. I'm happy to be a partner to you. You can see my office as a partner to you. If you want to connect with me, my email address is girmay.zahilay@kingcounty.gov. We can be friends on social media too. Twitter handle is @GirmayZahilay. Instagram is @councilmember.girmay. And let's build together. So if anybody has any follow-up items from this, I would be happy to connect with you with resources. I know there were a few things that I mentioned that I would be happy to connect with you on, whether that's on supporting specific pieces of legislation, getting connected to community members on the ground who are doing good work, or just if you want a government partner to be an ear and to be somebody who you can bounce ideas off of or who you can influence, I'm happy to be that person for you. So let's connect.
Thank you, Girmay. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Emily, Jamila, and Jordan. It was great to be on a panel with you all. Hopefully we can see each other very soon.
Have a great meeting. And Jamila and Jordan, don't go anywhere quite yet. Jamila, one step that leaders can take today, right this second.
I would say both continue to read and educate yourself on the problem, and even more actionable, look internally at your processes and figure out and work with the Black talent you have accessible to you to figure out where you can make meaningful change today and make the change. Don't talk about it, but actually be about it.
Love it. Jordan, one step leaders could take today?
Start by reading my book, Pivot to Win. I mean, that can help you change and create the type of income impact that you want to see in the community. No, Emily, I really think that, you know, I'll say this. I don't want to discredit many of the leaders that are on the phone and on the call today. I think many of them, the reason that they're here is to help them move to a better place and see what success looks like with more inclusion and more diversity within their organization. So I would continue to encourage them to take the steps that they already are taking. You know, this is, I mean, showing up here today is an action, you know, to devote some time throughout their busy schedule and be here. So I'll echo what Girmay said before he left. I'm happy to connect and provide and share other stories through my experiences of being an African-American that's transitioned, pivot away from the NFL game to entrepreneurship and growing up with discrimination and racism in Texas and, you know, visible demonstrations of the Klan where in places where we could not go. And so if in continuing to understand, you know, the story and the history of, you know, African Americans within this country, sometimes Jamila said it earlier, they're just unaware. And by starting the conversation and willing to grow, employing that growth mindset certainly says a lot about the ones who are here, and that they're really to take the action and do the work necessary to reach a more diverse workforce. So thank you for having me, Emily.
Thank you, Jordan, for being here. Thank you so much, Jamila. Thank you to everyone in attendance. So sorry we went a couple minutes over. If you are interested in continuing with networking, we'll move to that now. I apologize we didn't get through all the questions. Jamila and Jordan, if you can stick around for networking, please try and find Nicola. She had a question about, you know, we've heard race does not exist while racism does. So is there a contradiction with the fact that we should see color? So let's continue that conversation in the networking session if we all can. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone. Please check out WTCSeattle.com for upcoming programs, and we hope to see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on the panel. And Jordan, I'm waiting for my signed copy of your book.
You got it. No problem. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.